my name is Kashish, and next up is Naval Ravikant.
Hi, I'm Kismet, and next up is Nassim Taleb.
So this is the German version of skin in the game. But given that I don't read German, I don't know what it means, but they've used the English word skin in the game. So let me talk about the concept, but it's not as straightforward as you think. So I'm going to start with counterintuitive aspect of skin in the game before even defining it. Okay? It's about how you acquire knowledge, how you do things. So my national origin is trader. Okay, a lot of people have a national origin as mathematician or scientist or something like that, and then they become traders. I started as a trader. It means I stood with these people at some point, and they spit on you, and so you acquire all the germs, particularly that they have children, go to school, so on. So acquire practically, in a couple of years, you can practically cover every possible airborne disease that the planet can have in staying with these people on a pit. And it's not always crazy, but when it's crazy, it's even crazier than it seems here. So when you spend your time as a trader, I was working with mathematical products. I was also trading from a desk as well, which is less romantic as this kind of wild jungle atmosphere. So when you do mathematical trading, you quickly realize that theoreticians are full of baloney, to be polite. Okay, that there's something wrong about theory, and their view of the world clashes with that of every trader. We do things like people who ride bicycles, or say a prostitute being lectured by nuns, about how to do their business. It's kind of things like academics for us were people really outside the practical world who've never done anything, and their models. It's not that they're imprecise; it's a different world. Okay, so that's how the idea of skin in the game came to me. Because eventually you retire from trading, you lose hair. I had hair when I started, I lost my hair. You want to do something else with your life. 21 years of trading. You sort of miss it, but you want to grow up and become a real person. So what do? I kept looking for professions, but I wasn't good at anything else. Okay, and then I tried the retirement activities, tennis. Do you play tennis?
No.
No. Okay. I can't concentrate, playing tennis. So you lose concentration, and particularly when you play, when you have partners that get angry with you. Okay. Couldn't play tennis. Couldn't play chess for the same reason. You have an idea, you start meditating when you're playing chess, and you forget you're playing chess. So I realized I wasn't good at anything. So I said, okay, I'm going to give a little academia a try. So I started an academic career, working on modeling, and telling academics that they're full of baloney, all right? I'm being polite. The baloney replaced with the usual things that are clipped on the radio, okay? So this is the idea. This is my bio. So in other words, instead of going from theory to practice, I went from practice to theory. I saw something completely different. So, and let me explain something. I developed something called the ludic fallacy. The ludic fallacy is that the randomness, and I deal with probability, the randomness that you encounter in real life has absolutely nothing to do with the randomness you find in textbooks or in games. And I use the word ludic because ludic means games in Latin. Now, sure enough, someone has a painting, all right, for sale at Saatchi, Saatchi, or I think exhibited at the Saatchi museum, called the ludic fallacy. And I, can't make head of tails of what it means, all right? But it's nice to have your concept, someone painting something after your concept. He's probably on drugs and painted something and then read the ludic fallacy and decided to name what he painted the ludic fallacy, whatever it is, but I'm just showing it to you in case you can figure out, because I couldn't figure out. So, now comes the expert problem. Still, I haven't defined skin in the game, have you noticed? Okay, I may leave it to you. But, so, see my bio, started practice to theory, realized that things in practice are much more complicated than theory, and that, of course, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice there is. And then that concept of ludic fallacy, because my specialty was randomness and probability, and I gave it a name, as we can see in the paintings. So with this, I'm going to kind of explain the expert problem. There's two kind of professions. In the Black Swan, I defined there's a profession in which the professionals aren't really professionals. They don't know what the hell's going on. Yet nobody knows that they don't know, or at least, those who pay them don't know that they don't know what's going on. And the professions where people know what's going on. And how can we make the difference between these two? In the Black Swan, I said, okay, in domains like what I call Black Swan fraud, like the climate studies, they have no clue. But the weather forecaster over next week has a lot of clue, otherwise they can't survive. So, came up with this idea of expert problem, but I can illustrate it best with a story of a friend of mine who's also a trader and had the brilliant idea to go lose his money in the restaurant business. When you retire, and it was very nice because he lost his money. He prevented me from losing mine in that business. Now, what did he learn in the restaurant business? Something quite central that can illustrate what's going on with our society, all the ills of society, summarized in one, as well as ludic fallacy. In the restaurant business, they have awards granted by newspapers and by, of course, other restaurateurs. The best wood-paneled restaurant in the eastern United States, the best sushi, tuna sushi in Western Canada. Okay, and then you have all these awards. So my friend noticed that there was a gala dinner at every every year, and during that dinner, the award, the awards are given. So guess what? Most restaurants that got awards were out of business by the time they had the gala dinner. So what's the lesson there? Very simple lesson. Whenever you judge by peers, you don't want to impress your peers. And that's one thing I learned as a trader. As a trader, there's a rule. And I remember when I was very, very young, a trader, I had a lot of hair, and the badge said, new trader, new member, it's called. There's an old fellow, bald typically, old traders, grouchy, and bored, all right? He comes, hey, come in, kiddo, yeah. He said, stand up here, okay. He said, if people like you over here, you gotta be doing something wrong. I said, okay, kiddo, now you can go now, all right? So that lesson I learned from when you're judged by reality, it's a complete different dynamics than when you're judged by your peers. So businesses where you're judged by peers are businesses like the restaurant business will rot, okay? And businesses where you're judged by reality, by your P&L, by your accountant. The only person you want to impress at the end of the day is your accountant. Now, true, you don't want to be hated by your peers, but they're not the ones whose approval you need to seek. Now, academia, it's a business where people are entirely judged by peers. Entirely. This is what causes all the problems we have. Bureaucrats. Who judges bureaucrats? Other bureaucrats. The boss. It doesn't work. They start to have meetings, you see. And when a firm becomes very large, you cannot associate the P&L attributed directly to a certain person. They start having meetings, look busy, fly to Omaha, come back, do things, talk to you on the phone for 2 hours, write long emails, stuff like that. That's the problem.
Yeah, we see this in the tech industry too. There's a lot of tracking of inputs instead of tracking outputs.
Exactly.
A great engineer can create $1 billion worth of value. Look at Satoshi Nakamoto. And a bad engineer can cost you value. And it has nothing to do with the amount of time they put in. Yet there's still managers who want the engineers in at 8 a.m. They want them working 40, 50-hour weeks. And it's just complete nonsense.
Exactly. In trading, basically, you're just judged by your P&L. If you lose money, no matter how nice you are, it's not going to work. And if you make money, no matter how nasty you are, it doesn't make a difference. So here, plumbers. A plumber is going to be judged not by other plumbers. You don't their compensation isn't determined like the government calls up other plumbers. How much should we give them in bonus? Or it doesn't work that way. Okay, it's judged by you. Same with a dentist. If you show up to the dentist's office with your teeth intact and leave the dentist's office with half of them missing, well, visibly, there's a problem, okay? You can catch incompetence very quickly. So there's a judgment either by metrics, as in mathematics or physics, or in hard science, or engineering, or because they have laws, or by the clients, by reality, just like restaurants. So, but you have businesses where people are judged entirely by other people. So this is why you can figure out if journalism is going to die, because journalists try to impress other journalists. That's their business. They're not working on the reader. So you can have monoculture and become very vulnerable. So this to me explains that what I call the expert problem. That they don't get it. The New Yorker doesn't get it because they are part of the expert problem. There's that 1% of people that you're going to call the IYI, intellectual yet idiots. And that class of people, they have no accountability to reality. They just account to one another. And of course, it's going to degrade as a business. And this is where, what do experts do when you catch them with their pants down? Basically, macroeconomists have never forecast anything. A guy like Paul Krugman, I hope I'm recorded. Please make sure I'm recorded. Paul Krugman, he knows it's like worse than random. Okay, why don't we replace him with Miss Bree? She's an astrologist in the Lower East Side, right? With a much better track record. Why don't we Miss Bree?
I think the equivalent with this crowd is someone like a Nouriel Roubini, or all the people who are recently criticizing crypto.
Okay, I don't want to comment on my friends. Okay, let me comment
Well, this is a crypto conference, and with a crypto crowd, right? It's become popular to say like Bitcoin is rat poison, or it's a Ponzi, and so on. And every time one of these experts has called it out as being a failure, it goes up 10x within the next year.
I see. Wait, okay, yeah, I know. But if these guys had a P&L, there we go. If Paul Krugman had a P&L, he'd be bust long before Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, he would have been bust with the election because when you have a P&L, you can't really bullshit your way through life.
And the funny thing is there's no point in bullshitting financial assets because you can just go short it. Just put your money where your mouth is.
Exactly.
When people get into arguments about online whether Bitcoin's going to hit a certain price by a certain date, you don't have to argue online. You can go to LedgerX or you can go to your favorite exchange and short it or just take a position.
Exactly. So I have an aphorism that you don't want to win an argument, you just want to win. Okay, it's very different.
Yeah.
So, and here, of course, what do pseudo-experts do? They compare themselves to pilots. And we know that a pilot is an expert because a pilot has skin in the game. Bad pilots, where are the bad pilots?
Underwater.
Underwater, right? Because they have skin in the game. Okay, it's even worse. It's not just like a restaurant that can fold. They're gone. So there is a selection mechanism that doesn't depend on judgment of other pilots. At least in the later phases of life. So that's a problem. So you end up having fields like economics. This is the mind of pick any economist. This is how they think. They have that clarity of mind. That's on a good day, or after a cup of coffee, 2 espressos. That's how they think. And just to tell you how their mind works, okay? And they don't realize what's going on. So phase one.
I made the mistake of getting an economics degree alongside my computer science degree, and I can tell you that in 20 years of venture investing in startups, macro has been completely worthless. If anything, it's been distraction, entertainment, arguing about things that don't matter. It's just another branch of politics.
Yeah, but
micro has been very
they're not judged, even micro, they're not judged by any contact with reality, basically. Right? They don't have a P&L. If you don't have a P&L, you pretty much can, because they can get what I call a circular citation ring. They can get into any kind of game, grant one another Nobels, and nobody would know the difference. So now I'm going to define skin in the game with the notion of symmetry. Okay? So before I was introducing skin in the game from the back door, my own experience with it. This is in the Louvre. in Paris. And this is Hammurabi's code. It's the earliest code we have found so far, 3,800 years ago. This was in a public place in Babylon. Most people couldn't read, so those people would read it for you. You tell them, hey, reader, come over, tell me what it says. And it says the following. If the architect builds a house and the house collapses, the architect shall be put to death. Okay? Now, of course, it's quite harsh. It was Hammurabi, remember. It's not like, it's not, we're not talking about Jimmy Carter or someone. It was much earlier, okay? So, how was Hammurabi's law? What does Hammurabi's law aim at? It prevents you from hiding risk. You cannot hide risk and then walk away from it. The architect will always know more about where the risk is located than you. So they can hide it in the basement and somewhere, they can hide it in a foundation where they can cut corners and then walk away and go to another city and let the building collapse and say, oh, it's no longer my problem. You bought it, okay? You can't. You cannot walk away from the risk you've hidden. That's the core of Hammurabi's law. And let me show how I encountered it in my life as a trader with something I call the Bob Rubin trade that people still don't understand. It's as follows. Robert Rubin collected $120 million in compensation at Citibank for over a decade. And of course, stuffing Citibank, he was a vice chairman, and Citibank was taking some classes of hidden risks in like industrial proportion. And sure enough, there was absolutely no edge to these trades. They just blow up infrequently. And in 2008, Citibank was insolvent. And who paid for Citibank? Who stopped it out? Taxpayers. We did. Taxpayers.
Yeah.
Maybe not you, because I'm sure you.
I'm a taxpayer.
You're a taxpayer, but I'm sure you know how to defer taxes.
Trust me,
We're talking about bus.
No loopholes. If
Okay.
they're out there, let me know.
So therefore, okay. So, but you have include in that class of people your dentist, the bus driver, the Uber driver. They pay taxes. That's because anything online, anything electronic.
Well, the worst part is after these kinds of collapses, they
Yes.
say never again. So then they put in place tax and policies that actually suppress entrepreneurship, who are actually the people who are going to create the upside black swans.
They put more regulation, and then they call it some very unfortunate, highly unexpected event, often called black swan, for which we apologize profusely, but we are excused as nobody can predict these things.
But we're actually all gathered here as a direct consequence of the Bob Rubin trade, because the Bob Rubins of the world lost enormous amounts of money. It was a generational theft of trillions of dollars,
Yes.
Both through printing money and through taxes and hidden
Yes.
risk. We all paid for it, but in 2009, an unknown character named Satoshi Nakamoto released Bitcoin. And in the genesis block of Bitcoin, he cited bank bailouts as the reason why he
Why you can't
Bitcoin.
trust the Fed.
Well, why he created Bitcoin. I think it was
Yeah.
inspired.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
really?
It was inspired.
All right.
Or at least, yeah. At least a dedication to Bitcoin in the Genesis block is revenge for the Bob Rubin trade.
That's even more impressive about that story. So, and of course, needless to say that this has happened many times in history. In '93, there was something called the Resolution Trust Corporation, meant $600 billion at a time to bail out a category called savings and loans. They all got rich. One of them went to jail. One single person went to jail. The rest, they all got rich and retired. And of course, nobody showed up with a checkbook. Like Bob Rubin didn't show up on that day with his checkbook. He just resigned and said, it's a black swan. 1982, banks lost more money than they ever made in history, money centered by banking. So banks virtually have never made any money. They've just been living off of the taxpayer. But yet, bankers are very rich.
They just know how to socialize losses.
Exactly. They know how to hide their losses. So that's the skin in the game. Thou shalt not have the upside without bearing the downside yourself. You need to own your own risk. So that's the whole idea. After Hammurabi, of course, we have had a little more, let's say, more, what should I call them? More human, softer rules. Okay, like don't do to others. No more of this killing architects or something. Became the notion of symmetry. Society became based on the notion of symmetry. Okay, you don't want to punish someone too much. You don't want to punish too little. You don't want to have someone victimize others with impunity. So there's a bunch of rules, of which the better known one is the golden rule. Do to others as you want them to do to you. And I, of course, in skin in the game, don't like the golden rule, because the golden rule is a positive rule. If I can force you to eat Lebanese kibbeh, all right? Because that's what I like to do. So, and it also can invite busybodies, governmental people, who make you do things because they like it. So, the much more robust is the silver rule. Don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. Or the negative golden rule, vastly more robust.
Yeah, it's like all the people who are talking about censorship mechanisms of social media.
Yes.
I think the intellectually honest way is you build the censorship mechanism, then you hand it over to your enemy to run it. And if you're not willing to do that, then what you're basically just saying is, I want to be in charge, but you're trying to do it in an intellectually dishonest way. You're trying to do it in a face-saving way where people will give it to you, but it's just a naked exercise of power again.
I see. So, and then, but the Greeks and the ancients were aware of it. Basically, that the captain of the ship needs to be, you get off last, not like you don't sneak out first, like the captain of the Titanic. Mm-hmm. And then you had rules, one of which is that you eat your own cooking. Mercury was walking by one day, and a bunch of fishermen had a lot of, I think it was tortoises, right? So, tortoises?
Tortoises, yeah.
Sorry? Yeah, a bunch of tortoises. In Libya it was, or somewhere, and they didn't like him, so they invited them to eat the tortoises. So Mercury looked at them and said, do you think I'm an idiot? Right? Like with a New Jersey accent, Mercury. Yeah. He said, okay, you guys are going to eat all these tortoises, right, first, and then I'll eat the rest. So he forced them to eat their own cooking. So that has been present pretty much in commercial law forever as a guiding principle, ethical principle. And you even see the entire sections of the Talmud are based on the symmetry. In other words, in transactions where there's consideration in a contract, and Anglo-Saxon contract are based on consideration, that's what it comes from. Whether someone is taking too much risk for others, like for example in Rhodian law, that comes from Phoenician law, for example, if a boat is, pirates say take the merchandise, do something, who loses the money? How do you share it? Mm-hmm. Okay, all parties who can benefit from the transaction are obligated to pay the cost. So you have to have a complete, equity there. And there are other concepts like how much information should you disclose to the buyer? See, how much should you disclose to the buyer when you have a transaction? There are a series of ethical rules. Yes, if the buyer is someone from your community, you're obligated to divulge everything. But if he's a stranger, how much should you divulge? There are a lot of ethical rules that that you can see in the Talmud, you can see in the Islamic law, and you can see it, of course, in Roman ethics.
There's also a phenomenon when you have like long caravans of people crossing the desert or going through a difficult situation, like the exodus from Pakistan to India during that separation. If you were in the last few carts, you were most likely to get picked off by brigands and robbers. And if you lost something there, then the rest of the caravan was supposed to make it up to you. They were supposed to repay you because you were taking the most dangerous position in the back.
Yeah, so this risk sharing is actually, this was a part of Islamic caravans as well. Yeah. Because in the desert, it's the same story. As robbers will attack those who are isolated in the back. Exactly. They won't kill you, but they'll take your merchandise, and the other people are forced to compensate them or take turns on who's going to be in the back. Right. So this is not new, but there are a lot of nuances, and as we'll see in the conversation, basically modern life has lost some of these considerations, and we'll see how. At no point in time in history, I'm saying at no point in time, with few exceptions. One exception was India. Another was, I think, Egypt at some point, in the ancient Egypt. And one of them was modern-day France. Modern day, 100 years ago, France. Except for these situations, at no time in history did you have leaders who took less physical risk than the common person. No, at no time. The whole idea of being a lord is you got to protect. You're trading status for obligation to protect. So in other words, you got to take more risk. And in the Falkland Wars, it's called the Malvinas in some countries. The Falkland Wars. They had to find someone from a royal family to fly, to take the most dangerous mission in a helicopter, simply to, confirm that role. So, and of course, we lost that. So you can have some schmuck in Washington, warmonger. Okay, you can have warmongers who never take risks.
Yeah, so generals now lead from the rear, not from
exactly. And but warmongers, I'm telling you, civilian warmongers, whereas in the past, warmongers had to be in battle. And what does this symmetry do? Is that you want to cause people to die, you got to be exposed to it. It brings some kind of natural balance to society. And let me explain how. If you get on freeway, okay, you can easily kill 30 or 40 people. Okay, all you have to do is go in reverse, okay? If you have a Tesla or a car that accelerates very well, even better, all right? How come you don't see these freak accidents anymore?
obvious skin in the game.
Skin in the game, because bad drivers are dead, just like bad pilots, okay? So that is a regulator. So it's same thing with wars. Hannibal was first in battle.
Right.
Napoleon, first in battle. Napoleon was actually, they complained, he was way too overexposed in battle, okay, on his horse, going around the battlefield, okay, Napoleon. Roman emperors. This is Valerian, a Roman emperor, who was captured by the Persians. Why? Because he had to be on the front line. He wanted to be on the front line. He's an emperor. You got to be, you got to have a little bit of dignity. Come on. Julian, my hero, Julian the apostate and the Roman emperor, died with a spear lodged in his chest. Why? He didn't have a shield. So, you had to take more risk because that's your business.
Yeah, this
like
guy's
mafia
actually,
lord.
he ended up being used as a footstool by the
Yeah,
Persians.
footstool. Valerian was used as a footstool by the Persian emperor.
That's risk.
That's risk.
Holding crypto isn't risk. This is a risk.
Only 1/3 of emperors died in their bed. And we're not even sure they died of natural causes. Okay? So, we never had that situation. So it's a way you got to, but people aren't fools. You can tell that a person, a warmonger in Washington working for a think tank wants you to destroy Syria like the way we destroyed Iraq and Libya in the name of democracy. So we destroy, because for them, democracy is very important. So they cannot learn from experiences. You can never learn from experiences. So these people, but we know they're full of crap. We know Thomas Friedman is just a hack full of crap. Okay, it's just unfortunate that people listen to him in Washington, but the general population detects that, because the general population can detect if a person has scars or not, takes more risks or not. This is what's called Zahavian signaling, in the sense that when you're a risk taker, you have scars, no? And you produce these scars as an ornament. Zahavian signaling is a concept that we discovered. Why do peacocks have these fancy tails? These tails, in fact, are a handicap. It's just to show their genetic superiority, that they can function in spite of having these large burdening tails that bring predators because they're good and strong. And they use this, I took in Jaipur, India, this picture of right in front of me, of the peacock. So there's a concept of Zahavian signaling. In other words, it's called costly signaling. It's not cheap signaling, it's costly signaling. You see, there are a lot of virtues, we're going to talk about virtues, that are fake because anybody can signal these virtues. But risk-taking is real. You cannot fake risk-taking. You cannot fake risk. You can fake virtue, or what we call regularly virtue. So this explained to me, fundamentally, why we spend so much time haggling, in theology, over the nature of the Christ. I come from that part of the world where these discussions taking place, the Greek Orthodox Church. If you had a library, you'd fill in a stadium with documents about the discussions of, and the arguments of whether the Christ was God or was not God, but something like a God. What's the big difference? And why did they always revert to the notion that the Christ could not be full God? Why? Because think about it. If you're God, you don't have skin in the game. It's like in a Superman thing, all right? You have to have some vulnerability somewhere, all right? You have to suffer. So you suffer because you have skin in the game. That's the whole concept. In Christology, people didn't think of that effectively. Think about it. If you go to a circus and see an acrobat with a parachute, or instead of an acrobat with a parachute, they show you a movie, all right, of an acrobat, and you want the person in front of you to take risks. That's what you want. That's what you paid for, okay? You want real risk, because otherwise you're not signaling any virtue unless you take these real risks. And that was the story of the Christ. And this is something that people don't get, is that any virtue that doesn't entail some kind of sacrifice or cost is not virtue. The gods in the old days did not let you, claim to be their subject. Let's say you love Zeus or something, without paying the price, without having something to lose for it. And now in our society, we have fake virtue. What's fake virtue? This is in a hotel room. They tell you, save the planet, dear guests, save the planet. What am I doing here? Saving the planet or saving their bottom line? Okay, so they're using the planet as an excuse, all right? That's what I call virtue signaling. A virtue that doesn't cost you anything, doesn't entail any risk-taking. There's no risk in what they're doing, and you cannot have virtue that way. So here when young kids ask me, what should I be doing? Okay, in life. Start a business. Don't try to get a salary. Don't join an NGO, because all they do is virtue signaling. Maybe initially the founders really mean well, but then you end up with people trying to game the system, people I call rent seekers. Like the UN office in Lebanon, for example. They talk about deforestation so they can have the staff and they can have the funds so they can fly first class and get a nice apartment. But when you look at the numbers, there's no deforestation, you see? So you have all this industry of NGOs. So the first thing you tell a young person, do not join an NGO if you want to do well. Start a business and fail, right? Because basically we need people. We can't live off of just everybody's salary. You need to fail, right? To take risks. Just like a fallen soldier, okay, remains more honorable than someone who has never been a soldier. You see? Is there such a thing as a dishonorable fallen soldier? No. A dead soldier is very honorable. Right. Why a dead entrepreneur or failed entrepreneur? Why should a failed entrepreneur be not something very honorable, more honorable than someone who's never been an entrepreneur?
Come back with your shield or on it.
Sorry? Come back, exactly. Come back with a shield or on it. So this is the recommendation, I make, is that start a business. And then one thing I noticed, some people won't like this, but I didn't think that Trump had any chance till I saw him standing with the 11 in the primary with 11 or 12 Republican opponents. And at the time, there was a campaign to explain to us that Trump was an incompetent businessman because he lost $1 billion of his own money. The American public is no fool. There's something real about losing $1 billion if it's your own money. So although it makes a professor at a university would think, oh, it's horrible to lose $1 billion, like failing an exam. Life is not an exam. Losing $1 billion makes you real. And that helped them get elected, at least helped them in that stage of the election of the primary. So, inequality. A lot of people talk about inequality. First of all, there's an error in the way we measure inequality. We measure static inequality. Static inequality, the US, we don't do very well compared to, say, Italy or France. But dynamic inequality, you realize that if you take 1982, the 1982 Forbes 500 richest people, compare them to the 2012, you realize that only 10% of the families cross the list. Okay? Whereas in Italy, if you do Florence 1620 and Florence 2015, you will notice that the same names will be on the list, all right? You won't find an outsider on the list. So you got to look at it dynamically. Basically, in America, I think 60% of Americans spend 1 year and 10%. And something like more than 12% of Americans spend at least 1 year and then 1%. So you have the dynamics versus static. That's not the thing. There's something fundamental about inequality. People are willing to accept inequality if the person who is richer is taking risks. You see? You don't accept inequality if it's a rank-seeking CEO making 50 times what a worker makes, and people get upset about it. But people are never upset about Steve Jobs being richer than others. And actually, the Swiss were trying to pass a law. The Swiss could see the difference. The public could see it was trying to pass a law. I mean, it didn't pass, but it was not close, but it was like 30-40% of the people wanted to limit the salary of CEOs, but not entrepreneurs. See, there's a difference between entrepreneur, because entrepreneurs have skin in the game, to limit, because society doesn't like rich people who made their wealth without skin in the game. You can detect it. That's what's unpopular.
Yeah, people with a political agenda will conflate equality of opportunity with equality of outcome. Equality of outcome is communism. It's a terrible thing. It requires coercion. But equality of opportunity is what you strive for. Not that you can ever really have it. We all get dealt a different DNA hand, and where we're born and how we grow up and what we learn and what our temperaments are. But you can kind of at least narrow it down through education.
But you can measure. You can also measure this inequality, the equality of opportunity, with a negative metric. Most people look at the opportunity of people to rise. Well, if you rise, someone else got to come down. No.
Right.
So you got to take someone else's spot. So it's not quite a zero-sum game, but still, you don't want dinosaurs to stick around. So the best metric is how many large corporations fail.
Yeah.
Today, in the United States, the company's average life in the S&P 500 is 11 years today, and dropping. Used to be 60.
But the average price-to-earnings ratio is much higher than that.
Maybe.
But that's because extremists stand. There are a few huge outliers.
Yeah. Exactly. So there's nothing wrong, provided Google is exposed to going bust one day. You see? Same with your other firms, some of the firms in which you've invested.
The failure rate for small startups or for small cryptocurrencies, as we all know, is very, very high.
So I'm going to finish with then we start the conversation, with one more point that, it's, again, a trader's story. There's something I call the green lumber fallacy, is after the following, metaphor. There's a trader a fellow who wrote a book on how I lost $1 million, which at the time when he wrote it was very respectable. $1 million was a lot of money. Okay, now, they didn't have the Obama years and Greenspan. The printing. Okay, so how did he lose that $1 million? He traded green lumber, and he knew everything about green lumber. He knew the statistics, the physics, the chemistry, everything, the supply, the demand, the geography, the consumption. He knew everything about green lumber, read every magazine, every book he could find on lumber. And he lost all his money. Turned out there was in a pit a fellow, an old trader, who was very, very wealthy and always made money trading green lumber. He traded nothing else. And one day the narrator discovered that that fellow thought that green lumber was not freshly cut lumber, that it was lumber, that they took lumber and painted it green, right? And yet he made a fortune using green lumber. So what does it tell us? It tells us that from the outside, like an academic approaching a problem, what you need to know, it's not what the fellow who made a lot of money, his name is, I think, Siegel, something like Jerry Siegel or something like that, was that what he knew was not like, it's not like he didn't know anything. He knew a lot of stuff, but that stuff you can only detect from the inside. You can never know from the outside what it is, you see?
You have to play the game to understand.
You had to play the game to know what you need to know, okay? From the inside, not from the outside.
But people are always asking me to recommend a game theory textbook. And the reality is I never read a game theory textbook when I was young. I just played a lot of games.
Okay, there you go. So from being in that game, you see things differently, which is why education, I think, and anti-fragile, and hopefully we'll discuss that, and anti-fragile are really against education. And then finally, my final slide, and we're going to start the conversation, is about the following quiz, which applies to any business where there is skin in the game. Say you go to a hospital for your brain surgery. You need to have a brain surgery, which probably will enhance your mathematical skills. There's a special surgery, all right? You can do integrals after that surgery. Right? So you show up to the hospital, and you have the choice between two doctors. The first one looks like what Hollywood here would put in a movie, you know, measured, clear English, Harvard degree on the wall, someone who really looked like a Hollywood doctor, Hollywood version of a doctor, a brain surgeon. And the other person, same rank in the hospital, looks like that, looks like a butcher, thick fingers, no diploma on the wall, and speak with a thick New York accent. Okay, like you can put him in a mafia movie if you're going to put him somewhere, all right? So, and no diploma on the wall means he's embarrassed by his background. Which doctor should you rationally pick? Who would pick the butcher? Who would pick the slick Hollywood doctor? Okay, there you go. So the point is, unconditionally, you should pick the Hollywood doctor, right? But here, they're the same rank in the university. So think about it. The person who looks the least like a doctor got to have the most skills because he had to overcome the perception bias against it.
Yeah, there's a similar learning in early stage investing where you tend to avoid teams that look incredibly polished.
Exactly.
They have good PowerPoints, they're well dressed, they present well. What you want is the person who's been busy in front of the computer, flustered, gets up in front of a whiteboard, explains things a little too complicated, but has the genuine substance.
Exactly.
But the form alone lets you avoid it. So you'll get business plans that are too well written, and they use too many buzzwords, and you reject them just on that basis.
I would take it one step further and argue against a business plan. Anybody who's capable of writing a business plan, you don't want to invest with them.
Yeah.
So, okay, so now let's start the conversation based on these things.
Before we get into it, I want to give Nassim a proper introduction because I should have done that at the beginning, but I didn't know it was going to be part of the presentation. I normally have a rule where I don't travel for conferences, and neither probably should you, because they fall very much on this whole side of signaling, right, where you're kind of like looking busy for your boss rather than actually doing work. Now, there can be huge benefits. You can network with the right people. When they're small, you can meet the right people, but you know, sitting in an audience doesn't have that much value for you. You could sit at home and watch it on YouTube. So I normally don't travel for conferences, but when I got the opportunity to speak with Nassim, I had to come down from San Francisco. To me, he is one of the very, very few living natural philosophers, which is someone who practices science, does real work in science, but outside of a scientific institution, outside of the credential system. And I think his work is the kind of work that will last for 1,000 years. I don't say that lightly, but I think people will be reading. You know, there are books that Nassim has written, and I won't insult him by calling him Dr. Taleb. Is that okay? I'll just call you.
Yeah, it is an insult typically.
Yeah. So I won't insult you by calling you Dr. Taleb. But Nassim has written books that I think people will be reading 1,000 years from now. His new book, Skin in the Game, is fantastic. It's part 5 in his Incerto series, which includes Fooled by Randomness, Black Swan, Anti-Fragile, The Bed of Procrustes. It's written in a very timeless way. The concepts are very simple. There's not a lot of math to it, although there is a huge math backing to the Incerto if you want to get into it. And I would rather reread his work than anything on the bestseller lists, and I have. Many of his books I've reread. Now, the interesting thing is that I do get pushback when I say I'm talking to Nassim, because people say, well, he's so angry, he's so mean, he's so rude, because they can't fight him on the math, and they can't fight him on the principles. So they go after just the
also that I derive a huge amount of pleasure from Twitter fights.
Yes,
okay.
and he does.
Yeah, I derive. So, and why do I derive pleasure from Twitter fights? Think about it. If you're bored, it wakes you up. Okay. And at the gym, you see, I'm into weightlifting, and you have to take 15-minute breaks between sets.
Yeah, and I think
perfect.
You say it that you do it for fun, but I think it's also it's having skin in the game in your principles, right? Because as you're saying, courage is the only virtue that cannot be faked. I can fake any virtue on Twitter, but the one that I can't fake is courage, and that means going up under your name, not under some troll account name, and taking on somebody that you think has unfairly benefited from exploiting the system, like the Bob Rubin trade, for example, or the IYIs, the intellectual yet idiots that you call out and name, or when you call out Monsanto.
Yeah, but he's giving me too much credit, all right? I don't do it because of these principles.
He just likes to fight.
I do it because I get bored, all right? And sometimes waiting in line, or in traffic, when you're stuck in traffic, that's the best time for a Twitter fight. So really, it's not as lofty a goal, but it so happened that, okay, it can impress.
Well, I mean, there's
people,
not a lot of people that'll take on Saudi Arabia on Twitter and call them
Saudi Barbaria.
Saudi Barbaria on a regular basis, yes. But anyway, so I'm very happy to be here with Nassim. I think the books are absolutely worth reading. If you haven't read all 5 of his books, I wouldn't read anything else this year. I would literally just absorb them. And I don't say that lightly. That's true for me. Like, I'm going through skin in the game
He's
again.
He's going to convince me to try to read my books now.
Yeah, they're amazing.
The first one was finished 20 years ago, so you got to understand that I'm...
Well, there is some redundancy in there, as you would expect. And I think the common theme that Nassim pointed out to me when we talked earlier, running through the whole thing, is this concept of symmetry and asymmetry. Skin in the game is about symmetry between your consequences of your actions and learning and feedback loops. And asymmetry is about extreme outcomes, so black swan and those kinds of principles. So I think we can just dive right into it.
You want me to explain to them the symmetry thing?
I'm sorry?
I didn't put slides on symmetry, hoping.
Yeah, I think.
You want me to explain to them, or?
Yeah, let's go ahead. Why don't you explain symmetry and asymmetry in your
Okay,
words?
so now you don't understand random events. You can't predict what can happen. But you can pretty much tell how the random event would hit you, no? You know whether you're going to make from it, lose from it, make a lot, lose a lot, okay? So you try to position yourself in a way to benefit more than you would lose from a random event, okay? Or to lose less than your neighbor from a random event. That's the idea of a symmetry. It's pretty much like an option, what I call an option. An option, you make more on the upside than you would on the downside. And if you, in general, make more from a random event than you lose from it, then you're going to do very well in the long run, provided you make sure you're going to survive. That's the asymmetry that's present in contracts and options, stuff like that. That asymmetry becomes bad when you make the upside, like Bob Rubin, and transfer the downside to someone else. And the easiest thing to transfer to, a person to transfer to, the taxpayer, anonymous taxpayer, you see? So that is an asymmetry, okay? A bad asymmetry. But tinkering, trial and error, has a really positive asymmetry. So the simple example I would give is, if we wanted, what's your favorite dish?
It's pizza, but I shouldn't be eating it.
Pizza what?
But I shouldn't be eating it.
Okay, so pizza. Okay, so let's say we decide to make the best pizza. I would call it the Santa Monica flying pizza, all right? Here. So you rent a bus, you go to the local university, and bring every chemist, round up every chemist you can find, okay? And you take another bus and round up every overweight person you can find in LA who's well-dressed. This is my metric when you go to a restaurant, is to look at for overweight people who are well-dressed. Okay? That's sort of like, my thing. So you have two crowds now, okay? So if we ask a chemist, that's a top-down, okay, to invent that pizza. You ask a chemist, you have about 150 chemists, all looking boring and poorly fed and visibly not well dressed. And then you ask the well-dressed people, whatever, and overweight, you tell them, listen, let's make the best pizza. So the way you do it is you take an existing recipe and you start adding ingredients to it, no? And you taste. If it's good, you ratchet up. Okay, so you have the upside. If it's good, you discover something that really has good taste, you go up, or you ratchet up. In other words, you lock up your gain, okay? No. If it's bad, you give it to a chemist. You have very little to lose, all right? So that is trial and error, a lot of trial and error. And I showed an anti-fragile, and that's the main argument, that trial and error will always outperform design. Simply because of that property, that we're vastly more intelligent. We have an IQ of 1,000 when we do trial and error.
Yeah, these basic concepts, by the way, are cropping up all over in cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. It is literally a lot of your principles realized. Like Bitcoin, for example, is an asymmetric bet. If you lose, you just lose your money. If you win, if it becomes digital gold, you can make 50 times or 100 times your money. So it has that option.
It depends on what price you buy it. If you buy it
for sure, yeah,
100,000, maybe not. If you buy it for here, maybe. Right?
But it's also anti-fragile in the sense that every time it survives a hack or an attack or a failure of some part of the ecosystem, the developers improve the code, they improve the system, and then it gets better at surviving future shocks.
So this idea of symmetry, we say convexity, because a convex function very simply you make more when you go up than you lose when you go down. Okay? And it links to fragility. It's anti-fragile because fragility has the exact opposite attribute. You see, if I jump from 10 meters, I'm harmed more than twice that if I jumped from 5 meters, and more than 10 times if I jumped 1 meter,
right,
and more than 100 times. So if that's concave, it means you don't like volatility. And if you're convex during that range, you like volatility. You'd rather have volatility. You'd rather have shocks. You'd rather have turmoil. So this is the idea of anti-fragile, which applies to both the physical system and anthropology.
It's like people who are shorting cryptocurrencies. They're on the wrong side of that. They're doing concave trades.
Yeah, concave trade, yeah, because you have a lot more downside. I mean, think of Paul Krugman bearish at what, 40?
Sorry?
He was bearish at 40. He was
bearish
short
40,
at,
yeah.
say, imagine his P&L if he went short at 40. Yeah. Okay, think about it.
Yeah.
You know, first of all, you would never hear of him.
Also 100x.
He would have disappeared if he had a P&L. So this is why,
right,
I'm glad he didn't, because we want to just have someone to make fun of, all right? So surprisingly, he doesn't engage me in Twitter fights because simply he doesn't for some reason. Okay? He attacks other people, but not for some reason he doesn't.
Well, it's easier to attack people from behind the shield of the New York Times than it is to go out and into
Even
battle by
in New York Times, they don't. By the way, I saw a copy of it. The Skin in the Game was open as a bestseller, 2 on a bestseller list, without a single book review. Not a single book review in America, in the United States, 0. Okay, just to tell you that we don't really need the New York Times. We're becoming...
yeah, even in my industry, what's funny is people give out awards like VC of the Year or Angel of the Year and so on, and they're all nonsense because the reward is in investing and making the money. Like who wants to win the award for Bitcoiner of the Year? You just want to own the Bitcoin, right?
So there are a couple of things we've got to talk about. The Lindy effect,
yeah,
linked to fragility, like the test of time.
Yeah,
but you present the Lindy, but let me first say one property of the news that's not, never existed before in history. Before 1940, or 1946, I think, when families had a television set, so you have a small family now watching television, getting one-way information, reading the New York Times. You don't go to a square, you don't get, okay. Before that period in time, people did not get the news from one source. It was like Facebook or Twitter. People traditionally were both conveyors and recipient of the news. So we're all involved in the news making, you see. So you go to the barber, you get the news, you go, you transmit it, you tell the fisherman the encounter, then you tell your barber, you bring back information to the barber. That was, so news were something that was organically spread in society, and nobody could control it as a source. Okay, before the 1940s propaganda, New York Times, all that era of television, and we broke out of it with Twitter and social media. So, and there's a concept called Lindy, and the news, the way it was organized during that period from 1946 to the election of 2016 was not Lindy. Can you explain to them what Lindy is? And we'll talk.
Yeah, Lindy just means sort of stands the test of time, which is like any book that's been around for thousands of years is likely to be around for thousands of more years. The best predictor of the survivability of something is how long it has survived.
For something that are Lindy.
Certain things.
Yeah,
for things in the intellectual domain, for things in the social domain. Yeah.
So it was discovered Lindy is a restaurant in New York that has cheesecake, and it was a horrible cheesecake. And I spoke about it, I discussed it in Skin in the Game, and it had the great idea to go bust on the Tuesday, the same day Skin in the Game was published, all right? After 60, 70 years. So Lindy was a restaurant where actors used to meet, and they discovered that plays that survived 200 days had 200 more days. 1,000 days, 1,000 more days. They discovers that rule. So you can classify things on whether they're Lindy or not. Now, Lindy tells you that technology, okay, is going to be, old technology will outlive new technologies. Not because new technologies are bad, but there will be more vulnerable new technologies to other newer technologies. Whereas old ones are not.
The fork, for example, is a piece of technology that's become invisible to us, but it is technology and something that helps you eat things, and the fork's going to be around forever. It's a tried and true model, and the fact that it's been around thousands of years means it'll be around for thousands of years.
There's something in blockchain, the concept of a transaction coupled with a commercial transaction coupled with a financial transaction that's entirely Lindy.
Yeah.
And that's the letter credit, which itself was replicating something used in maritime commerce. In other words, the banking, they devised a system by which you trigger a currency, which basically the minute you deliver the merchandise. Now you go there with merchandise, you come back with a currency. So mixing the physical transaction with a financial one, all in one, it's the same transaction. Coupling them is a very old thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in crypto, like Bitcoin is the Lindy currency. It survived a long time, it survived the longest, and it won't be digital gold until it's survived long enough, but the longer it survives, the longer it will survive, the more faith people can put in it, and the more money they can put into it. Exactly,
and government-issued currencies has never been Lindy. People don't realize, and you can get a clear idea if you read history, okay? You know the story of remember the story of the Christ in the temple? Why did he fight the money changers? Why were there money changers in the temple? Because God of the temple did not like all these currencies. He didn't trust these currencies. He wanted the shekel of Tyre, and now current day in Phoenicia, okay, because they're the only reputable ones.
Yeah.
So he forced cities to compete on who's going to have the most solid currency for the God to take it. And then money changers would change into that shekel of Tyre. So
God's practical.
Currencies have always government have always debased their currency.
Yeah.
But yet citizens had the choice between currencies.
Yeah,
what currency to use, and what would God want? He would select the one that was the least debased.
Well, you pointed out that one of the big things in history was separating the state from church. And some religions have done that and some haven't,
yes,
where they still combine them. But that was a major revolution, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And the interesting thing with crypto is we're trying to separate money from the state. And that transition, if it successfully happens, will probably be just as impactful and take quite a while to play out.
It is interesting because if you start having competition between cryptocurrencies, it would be the same competition as the one that prevailed in ancient times between issuers, because there was a stater in Asia Minor. Each king produced his or queen her own currency, and then you'd go by the one that was the least prone to debasement.
Right.
The one you can have faith in.
In my opinion, it's good to have the competition, though, because it makes them anti-fragile.
Exactly.
It exposes them to randomness and variation and makes them evolve.
Exactly. And it's not till recently that you're forced, you can only conduct transactions in peso, dollar, and this and that. You've got to convert. In the past, people picked the currency that was the most reliable for transactions.
Yeah. Another point in asymmetry that you brought up, which I thought was very counterintuitive, at least for me, and completely changed the way I think about many important things in the world, is the minority rule. I don't think that one's obvious at all. It's one of the things that maybe it's obvious in hindsight once you fully understand it, but I think the repercussions aren't obvious, and the fact that it even is a very stable outcome isn't very obvious. So I'd love for you to just go through the minority rule a little bit.
Okay, I discovered the minority rule one day. Ironically, I was trying to explain what a complex system was at a barbecue of the Complex System Institute. Okay, and that complex system have one attribute, that at different scales things behave differently. Okay, so in other words, a collection of individuals don't behave like separate individuals. They behave as separate animals, really separate animals, which is something that a lot of people don't understand in government today, is that if I understood the psychology of each person in this room, I can't predict the collective, how they will behave collectively. Okay? But nurses know that, people know that from children, all right? You can predict each child independently, you put them together, it's unpredictable. Okay? It's a different animal. So that's a concept of a complex system. Trying to explain it, okay, till I was hit with the best example with a complex system, because at that barbecue there was we had food, all right, and drinks, and a delegation came from Jerusalem, and they were all Orthodox, all right, a bunch of people. So a fellow showed up, to say hello, and I felt embarrassed. I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, we don't have kosher drinks." He looked at me, he said, "All drinks are kosher here." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, where do you buy the drinks?" "Here in Boston." "Okay, they're all going to be kosher." "What?" I Googled the proportion of kosher eaters and drinkers in America, less than 0.3%. That's on a good day, all right, on a religious holiday, 0.3%. Yet close to 100% of drinks in America are kosher. Why is that so? Simply because
the Jews run the world.
Sorry? No. Because if it's...
Do not quote me on that.
No. You're being filmed. It's because it's a very simple concept. If let's say I'm Coca-Cola, what are you going to have? Kosher Coca-Cola? Non-kosher Coca-Cola? All right? You're going to have different departments, different things, different trucks, so you don't get mixed. And then supermarkets will have different, aisles. This is kosher aisle. What do you got to do? You make them all kosher. Okay. Those who, like me, don't know the difference, okay, will drink Coca-Cola. I don't drink Coca-Cola, but so it so happened that when we looked at the bottom of the lemonade bottle, there was a sign saying it was kosher, that only the kosher people know how to identify, okay? So that's the minority rule. So if a Martian came from space and sampled food preferences, okay, he would say that Americans are 100% kosher in drinks, okay? Yeah, not 0.3%. So why? There's an asymmetry. The kosher person will never drink non-kosher, but the non-kosher, can drink kosher.
Yeah, that's the key. The minority,
exactly, that's minority rule.
For the minority to control the minority has to be intransigent. They have to be absolutely unwilling to go along. They have to be
unwilling to do that.
Exactly.
So, for example, people didn't notice one thing about the preferences, marketing preferences. They don't understand. They look at marketing preferences of individuals, and they make cars accordingly. Most Americans, at a time when cars were, still had stick shift, preferred stick shift. The majority, 75%. But most of them had a family member who didn't like stick shift.
Right.
So your family of 5 and one family member, at a time that people didn't have a lot of cars per household, one household member can drive. So what do you do? It's going to go automatic.
Or it's like if someone in the house has a peanut allergy or a gluten allergy.
Exactly.
The whole house ends up with no gluten or no peanats.
So there's nothing wrong with accommodating the minority, so long as you know it.
Right.
Now, the interesting thing about the minority rule is that it seems to me that it's a norm rather than the exception in society, and about anything. So the reason we have non-smoking spaces, actually, I joked with a friend of mine. One day I had a French visitor when I was a student, and he came, he met me. I said, meet me in front of this restaurant and book a table. He couldn't find a non-smoking table. I told him, did you try the smoking one? He said, yeah. I said, okay, go buy a pack of cigarettes, and we'll go to the smoking section. He thought that, you're forced to smoke in the smoking section. So, and we smoked in the smoking section to be there and play the game. So, but really, you have these asymmetries actually running our lives.
Yeah, and
the formation of ethics.
So this is very this is very interesting for me because, like on Twitter, for example, if you go on there, you'll always find somebody who's outraged about something, right? There's somebody in the extreme left or the extreme right in politics or in crypto land, and they're just really, really angry about something. And for a while, I thought they're just being super ineffective, and that's what I was hoping. I was hoping that the most outraged, most angry people are actually very ineffective, and they're just misguided, and they're kind of on the corner. But the sad thing is the minority rule kind of shows that if these people are intransigent enough, they actually run and control society. They establish the laws for the rest of us. And we kind of intuitively know this, like from revolutions. Like revolutionaries tend to be small bands, small groups that won't put up with the status quo, that overthrow the entire system. Because most people in the center just kind of don't care. They just kind of want to get along, and they want to go along. So this comes back to, like, if you're willing to tolerate intolerance, then you're going to live with the consequences. If you look at, for example, elections, there is a belief in politics and political science that it's the voter in the center, the median voter, who everybody competes for and decides how the election runs. But that's not true when you have third parties with intransigent minorities. So for example, if the Bernie voters absolutely will not vote for the mainstream Democrat, the Clinton, or if the extreme right voters won't vote for the Jeb Bush, then they'll actually stay home or they'll vote for a third party, then you actually have to appeal to them. You have to go with their preferences. You don't care about the center. As long as there's enough of them. It doesn't have to be a large number. It's just a few percentage points, and they're enough to control the entire outcome. So we live in a world that is actually structured around the preferences of radicals who won't compromise. It's not built around the will of the majority. The will of the majority does apply in some cases, but in many more cases it's the minority rule. And there are all kinds of other implications.
Ethics. Yeah, I mean, ethics, for example. People have the illusion that society is getting more ethical because the majority is becoming more ethical. No. It's minority rule. Another mistake made by Monsanto is that when introducing GMOs, they thought that all it took was convincing 51% of consumers to have GMOs, okay? They did not think it through properly, because think about it. All you need is 3% of people who are absolutely against eating GMOs, all right? And then you're gonna have a party here to celebrate the collapse of, say, Saudi Arabia, Barbaria. Say, okay, we have a party, all right? What do? You send a letter, say, GMO, no GMO. You make everything non-GMO. You make everything organic. And the difference in price, when the difference in price is small, everybody switches to the one that the minority wants, to the choice of the minority. When the difference in price is large, then you may have two varieties. Like, for example, for meat, kosher meat and kosher stuff, it's much more cumbersome to have everything kosher. Right. Because it's more costly and it's complicated.
Right. So there's the evidence that Jews don't run the world.
Exactly. but believe it or not, 100% of the meat you get, imported the lamb in the United States, about 100% is halal. Huh. Because New Zealand exports, okay, they're the main exporter. What is it going to do? What is it? Put it in a ship to Malaysia? Or what if Malaysia doesn't want? There's less demand. What are they going to do? De-halal it for send it to the United States? Right. So they made everything halal. So all their exports are halal. So at Christmas, I saw this. It was Christmas. Halal was because I can detect. I read Arabic. It's halal meat, right? Yeah. So it was probably they produce it, and then we don't have to worry about merchandising, about perishability and stuff like that. To make everything halal, it's much simpler.
So the minority rule applies when the minority is not willing to compromise.
when it's relatively distributed amongst the whole population. Like if they're off by themselves in a corner, then maybe you can service them just as a minority and leave them.
Exactly. If you have a geographic diversity, okay, then you don't have minority rules, all right? If you say the people who eat halal live in the neighborhood, people who eat kosher live in the neighborhood, have their own ecosystem, then you won't have minority rules. As you open up the country, then the minority rule will prevail about anything.
Yeah.
But conditional on the majority not being ticked off by it.
That's right.
Okay, that's just, in Europe, for example, now pretty much schools have to have halal meat, and you have reaction. People didn't know. I mean, you should have done it in a more
quiet way,
surreptitious way. Yeah, but because parents say, no, I refuse. That my child eats halal. Okay, now you have a counter reaction, just like the Christians in a Roman world. Halal meat resembles all sacrificed meat in the Near East. Actually, you have to sacrifice the cow or the lamb, the sheep, in a certain way, and Christians would never eat sacrificial meat. In the old times, pagans would have sacrificial meat, and there's a lot of Christians who die of hunger in front of a table full of meat, just to show that they were Christian and they would not eat sacrificial meat because for them it's polluted. Costly. So you may have a counter minority rule coming from somewhere. You see?
Yeah, I think there are cases where the minorities themselves are. And minority here, obviously, you know what it means. It means a small group of people who are intransigent themselves are very intolerant of maybe even the existence of the majority or the way the majority likes to function. So it does create a counter-reaction. So it's not that all revolutionaries, necessarily control the world. Very often they just get lynched or stamped out.
Exactly. So we have a thin balance here between majority rule and minority rule. And Tocqueville wanted to protect the minority from the majority, all right?
Yeah.
And now we may have to do an inverse Tocqueville as well, to bring symmetry, protect the majority from the minority.
Yeah, but it applies in crypto. For example, if imagine that something like, I don't know, if I had to make up a number, like call it like 10 or 20% of the good developers in Silicon Valley are now working on crypto-related projects, or at least dabbling on it. And if they all announce tomorrow that they're only going to work for companies that pay them in crypto, then pretty soon you would see every payroll system switch to also offering crypto
that's
payments.
True. If you're unconditional about getting or paying or receiving in crypto, you install a minority rule.
So minority rule is a very powerful concept. It's one of the ones in Skin of the Game. I highly encourage you to go through it. Let's talk a little bit about black swans, which is an old concept. You're very famous for it. Did you coin the term?
No, black swan term was the earliest use of it was by a Roman poet who said that a good person is as rare as a black swan. And it was used for something, rare but not completely impossible.
Yeah, and now we see them everywhere. Now that you've kind of popularized it, I think it's very.
Now we see them everywhere because we use as a logical problem that no matter how many white swans you've seen, you cannot rule out a black swan.
Right.
But there's an asymmetry. If you've seen one black swan, then you can say that they are black swans.
It's kind of like how science works too. When you never completely prove anything, you can only make it falsifiable. You can only disprove.
Exactly.
Right. So anytime somebody says this is proven by science, they usually don't understand.
They don't understand, or they work for Monsanto.
Yeah.
Or the ex-Monsanto. The ones they say it's proven by science. Science is not about proving. Science is about disproving and having something that has not been producing a result that has not yet been disproved or superseded by something else. So it's a process, not a result.
There are a whole branch.
But science is a minority rule, by the way.
Yeah?
Yeah, science. When someone tells you 300 Nobel Prize winners said this, okay, that doesn't count, because one counterexample can destroy the whole argument.
Right. Consensus doesn't matter.
Consensus doesn't matter. It works by minority, but the system is there to protect that minority that is right against the majority, except in economics, of course.
Right. It's like, was it Galileo who said, but yet it moves, when he was...
Yeah. E pur si muove, yeah.
Right. Very interesting related concept that you've tried to bring into the mainstream, which I don't think has quite gotten mainstream yet, is ergodicity. I don't think most people understand it. I think it's one of your more complicated concepts. I think I finally do understand it, but I'd love to have you explain it and see if we can spread the name of it.
I'm going to explain one thing that called path dependence. If you wash your clothes first and then iron them, say you wash your pants and then iron, you get different results from if you ironed your pants first, then washed them? Okay, so the sequence matters, no? Okay, so it's trivial, but you need to analyze things dynamically to get that point. So skin in the game really is organized around two concepts. Things seen statically that when you view them dynamically have completely different properties. And you can only get that if you're either super smart mathematically, which nobody is, or have skin in the game, because you realize that. So if you go to a casino and you have a small probability blowing up, no matter what your edge is, you will blow up. That's it. So no matter what because you cannot say, okay, I'm going to blow up and then get rich. You can't. You got to get rich, then blow up. So the sequence matters. So that is the path dependence. We detect it. This is the reason why we're paranoid. And I noticed that there's a guy who got a Nobel, Thaler, a pseudo-Nobel in economics. It should count as a negative, all right? So, and then all his work is based on showing how we're irrational statically, okay? He, for example, in one of the example where we show we're irrational, if you go to a casino and play with a house money in the sense that you bet small, and that you win big. If you win big, then you risk big. But if you lose, you don't take risks. So in other words, your initial endowment, you try to preserve it, but you risk everything you make from a casino. Okay? He found it irrational. But if you look at it dynamically, that's what every trader does. You play with the house money. If you don't follow such a strategy, you're eventually going to go bust one day.
Right.
Because you can't say, I can look at the average return, because if you're bust on day 28, there is no day 29. You see? Whereas if you take an average of people's returns, if number 28 goes bust, number 29, can operate freely, you see? So that concept of path dependence was not incorporated into the psychology of decision making. And then therefore they found that we're irrational in many places where in reality we're not. Because if you look at things in sequence, you see, so you got to always look at things in sequence, not look at things statically.
Right, so like a lot of behavioral psych studies and economic studies will say that if I offered you $1 billion to play Russian roulette, right, and 6 people play Russian roulette, well, 5 out of the 6 make $1 billion each. So assuming that your value of your life is lower than $1 billion, you'll play Russian roulette once. But would one person play Russian roulette 6 times, right? No. So confusing those two, the probability of a group going once each versus an individual taking all of the risks in sequence gives you completely different answers. And there's this concept, which I'm sure you've all heard of, loss aversion. Where people are irrationally loss averse. No, they're not irrationally loss averse. They're rationally loss averse, because if you go bust, you can never recover. So, like for example, in your crypto asset accumulation and trading, if you go super short and you sell everything and you lose everything, you'll never get back in the game. You have to stay in the game, and it's kind of an obvious concept once it's explained and described. But there are entire books written on it. The Kelly Criterion and Fortune's Formula, that book, and so on. But
yeah, only traders and mathematicians who do information theory or computer science get the point. Like Kelly, Shannon, and Shannon Entropy, they get the point that you got to look at things dynamically. But psychologists are so naive, and they keep getting Nobels. They're naive by saying we're irrational to be paranoid. They don't understand that dynamically, if we were not paranoid,
wouldn't be here.
We wouldn't be here. Okay. So you cannot analyze one event. You got to see how that event is going to shorten your life expectancy. So there's some classes of risk you should never be taking. And effectively, when you take Goldman Sachs, has been around 159 years. You may hate them, I hate them, but you got to admire how they stayed alive. Why? They never take risk of ruin. And that's the same thing as a lesson I had as a trader by an old trader who came and told me, listen, take all the risks you can, but make sure you're in tomorrow. So make sure you survive. So it tells you that you got to gear your risk-taking first towards survival, and that entails you take more risk as you're making more money with the casino money. And that's called mental accounting, is deemed irrational. And being paranoid is deemed irrational because they only look at a single event, not series of events. And something has been happening now with psychologists. We're in the middle of a replication crisis, and their papers don't replicate. And those that replicate don't really have the same effect. So, which tells us that whatever they call science is vastly outperformed by your grandmother. So if you go ask your grandmother, particularly if she's have Mediterranean wisdom, I'm biased, all right? So Mediterranean or some kind of Russian particularly, but the babushka, ask grandmothers, all right? So, or grandparents or grandfathers as well. They will, whatever they will tell you will be Lindy, will have survived the test of time. And if psychologists agree with your grandparents, okay, it means they're right. If they bring something new that your grandparents didn't know, odds are it's going to be suspicious.
Yeah, any field where you need to add the word science to the end to make it seem legit probably is not legit.
Exactly.
So I think
I mean, if we want to summarize, because time's up.
Yeah, the flashing time's up at us.
The flashing time, but possession is 9/10 of the law. So
yeah, right. Exactly.
So
until the audience leaves, we're here now.
So to wrap things up here, what I was saying in anti-fragile and in the skin in the game is there are two things that are wrong when you analyze them naively. Is a scale. A large country is not like a small city that you blow up. Singapore is not like a small China, and likewise a group of people acts differently. That's complexity. And the second one is with time, if you, under repeated behavior, you have to have complete different strategies from the static ones. And that was detected by practically every grandparent and people who have skin in the game. So that's sort of the local message from skin in the game. And the overall message is, my message before you conclude, is the idea of the inserto is that there's a lot of uncertainty out there. There's a lot of stuff we don't know. But the good news is that there's only one way to go about it. Okay? And it's quite interesting to see that the more uncertainty there is, take global warming, there's a lot of uncertainty because there's a high probability that the IPCC is full of crap. Okay, and there's a probability that that their opponents are full of crap. All right, but the more uncertainty there is in a system, the less you want to pollute because you don't know what's going on.
You don't know what's happening.
Right. So interestingly, the more uncertainty there exists in the system, okay, the more you got to follow a certain paranoid route. Try to position yourself to have more upside than downside, and effectively your decision becomes much easier. So let's not waste time trying to argue about the niceties of the future. Right? Because the more uncertainty there is, the more we know how to act. So that's sort of the idea of the inserto in general.
Well, I recommend everybody just devour all of Nassim's books. It'll improve your decision-making in life, in crypto.
That put pressure on me.
Yeah, no, figuring out even like which doctor you should go to, which restaurant you should eat at, how you should conduct yourself honorably and morally. I think it's an amazing work, and I hope he keeps putting them out. It's not the last one, I hope.
I don't know. If you keep talking like this, I'll stop.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks.